Just a brief summary. So I'm going to be talking about transmedia storytelling, just very briefly about what it is. And then the key parts are the taxonomy of transmedia storytelling. So how can we define and understand these different objects that belong to Mass Effect universe? And then what we can think about it. And these are all kind of thoughts that I'm still processing. So it's a paper that I'm still working on it. So first, what is transmedia storytelling? I'm going to use the very basic definition from Herring Jenkins. So it's a story that unfolds across multiple media platforms, with each new text making a distinctive and valuable contribution to the whole. And what is very interesting and very nice about transmedia storytelling, and Jenkins highlights this, is that it doesn't matter how you enter that universe because everything can work as a point of entry. So most people that learn about Mass Effect started with the games, but there are also people that maybe read the books or maybe saw the comics somewhere or maybe saw some fan art elsewhere. Uh, and all of these are elements of Transmedia universe. And yeah, they can all be points of entry that then you go into this big, amazing universe that is the Mass Effect. So for my PhD, I worked with a specific taxonomy of transmedia storytelling that was made by Colin Harvey. That the idea was to categorize the different Mass Effect materials out there into 5 different categories. So directed transmedia storytelling, which is one that is more connected to what BioWare created themselves. So we're talking about the games, we're talking about DLCs and etc. Devolved transmedia storytelling, detached, directed, and emergent. So I think it's going to be a little bit easier if I just show you the examples of what is it. So if we get what is out there regarding Mass Effect, when we talk about directed transmedia content, we're talking about the main games, the iOS mobile games, and the DLCs. So they are all these they are the core of Mass Effect, that it starts as a game. So everything that is game related, we can put it as directed, but it's also the kind of content that was directly created by BioWare or by smaller companies, but they all build to the same narrative, right? Um, Devolved transmedia, it's one that we can look at it as part of service that is very much connected to BioWare, but it's BioWare in partnership with others. So we have Dark Horse to create the comics, Penguin Random House to publish the books, and then the authors of those books, Funimation, TO Entertainment for the Mass Effect Paragon Lost, the several merchandises we see, and etc. So these are kind of these devolved ones that they are connected to BioWare, but also to other companies. We have the detached transmedia that it still uses a lot of the IP. So while directed and devolved, the legal matters of the IP, so the intellectual property, are very much well made. So you have the contracts and you have very clear definitions of the boundaries and who gets what money and etc. For detached transmedia, not so much, but you still see a lot of references to the IP, including official stuff of the IP, but they are not directly connected to BioWare. So 2 examples I bring here, it's if licensed merchandise is on one hand devolved because it's connected to buyer directly, any unlicensed merchandise is detached transmedia. Uh, and porn parody as effect, the triple X parody, it's also detached, even though aesthetically and even in terms of this history and the lore of that short pornographic movie is very much connected to Mass Effect universe. It has a specific setting and place and time within the game that the scenes are happening. It's of course still detached because I highly doubt that BioWare gave the green light for them to make a porn parody of it. And then we have the fan-made creation, so everything that's made by fans. So we have directed UGC, that here good examples are modding and machinima. Because what's the difference between directed and emergent here is that directed is going to use material that comes straight from the original source. So we see that when people do modding or machinimas, that they are working directly with the code, directly with the images that were originally generated by BioWare. BioWare doesn't really foster too much the creation of modding, but other companies do, like Bethesda has a big modding community, and they do also provide modders with the tools to mod games and etc. So there's more of a connection there, but it comes from this original content of the game. And emergent user-generated content than everything that's generated by fans, right? Fanfic, fan art, machinimas, but also as a fact, the triple X parody that I like to classify as both detached and emergent UGC, because at the same time that you can see was created by someone that's a big fan of the franchise, it's also made by a professional pornographic video company. So what are some things we can talk about this transmedia universe? There's a very tight control of BioWare regarding directed and evolved transmedia, but it doesn't mean that there is a lot of respect to the canon stories or a coherence within those stories. There's actually a lot of incongruencies and problems with how the storytelling happens between comic books and game specifically. And I think most of you might know how much fans complain about the fourth book and how it's very weird and doesn't really fit with the narrative much. But that's not the only problem it has. Detached transmedia does not adhere to legal requirements for IP use, but aims to reproduce Mass Effect aesthetic and lore with a degree of fidelity. Then direct UGC uses official Mass Effect content, but there is no incentive from BioWare for users to do so in modding or machinima practices, so they are still independent and emergent in a way. And emergent UGC is very much widespread. All you need to do is Google Mass Effect fan art for an infinite amount of results, but it's very hard to quantify and also to qualify. And it doesn't really matter too much, right? If it's good or bad, doesn't matter. What's about fan creation is just putting out there something that is important, that is subject, it's passionate, has varying degrees of attachment to official lore, and aesthetic is really about telling the stories you want to tell instead of the stories that are already being told by BioWare. Uh, BioWare does control the IP, but of course they don't restrain fan creation. You don't see cases of BioWare suing people, at least not as far as I know. Instead, they actually profit from it. They have increased visibility. They foster community. Hence, the N7 Day, for example, allowed changes to the IP to happen. Stephanie showed earlier some things about Mass Effect marketing, and a lot of those changes that happened with the inclusion of FemShep to the marketing was because of fans and a bit of fan activism happening there. Uh, we can say that there is an infinite number of Mass Effects, and BioWare helps that by creating a game trilogy that has many paths. So there's so many possibilities within the game, and so many storylines we can follow, and so many places where we can create our own fanfics and try to understand what happened. Although, of course, it has only 4 endings and all the problems that come with that. And that becomes a trap even more because when you create a transmedia project where one of the objects is highly interactable and highly branched, uh, you trap yourself by creating very stable stories with comics and books. So there's a discrepancy of the media while games are highly interactive and foster player agency. Other official transmedia products break this agency. So you can think about something like a transmedia dissonance to follow on the footsteps of ludonarrative dissonance. So there's some sort of transmedia dissonance here when you're consuming media that give you different uh, possibilities of agency. However, it's the books, comics, and game that create the canon story. And between what are the negotiations that happen between fans and BioWare? The back and forth between fans and BioWare led to changes in IP, although most of these changes are deemed insufficient. I see people here mentioning Garrus on the chat. Yes, the Garrus is one of these changes as well. Uh, the sudden addition of Caden as a male-to-male romance in Mass Effect 3 as well. And the thing is, with every fandom, fans claim ownership of their objects of fanish affection. And in doing so, they will clash with producer intention and needs. So this is a dynamic that's always important for us to investigate. So what do fans want? What does BioWare want? How are those things being negotiated? How much is BioWare opening possibilities? How much is BioWare not opening possibilities? But also, it allows fans to have a good degree of freedom in creating something. Fans will break the boundaries of canon so they can create their own settings. We can call them multiversal variants of the original. So, yes, settings where male Shep can date Garrus, which is not possible in game, but then it's possible in fan fiction, and many other possibilities. In so doing, they show both the political potential of the franchise's diversity and the limits to this diversity imposed by BioWare in the official storylines. So a lot of the discussion about diversity in Mass Effect, it starts from the possibilities that BioWare gives by creating this story, but it's really fostered through fan creation. It's really in the fandom that you really see the potential of diversity that you could see in that universe being brought up to life and really being explored in depth much, much more than BioWare is able to do it, either because of market constraints, money constraints, several issues connected to it, but they are another paper. Um, so as you've seen, you might have noticed so far that I've been using several images and things that are connected to different aspects of this transmedia universe as well. And I think that in particular Mass Effect, and I think this conference is a proof of it. Mass Effect is a game that is historical in many ways and has really changed not just a lot of stuff about games industry, but also games research, I find. And it's still able to do it to this day. So yeah, I did my whole PhD on Mass Effect, and I see there's other people here doing their PhD on Mass Effect as well. So it is possible. And it also shows that the game has a lot to offer. And if it's still offering a lot to this day, it means that it still has a lot. And I think the transmedia universe seems still to be one that is underdeveloped or under-researched, although I think someone here is doing that, which is great. It's important that have people do that. But this particular transmedia universe, I think it shows possibilities and constraints of transmedia franchises, especially when they involve gaming. And I think one of the main ones is really how do you negotiate the freedom that Mass Effect games give to players and the constraints that when you read a book, I know the story of Anderson is that one that's written in the book. There's nothing you can do to change the paths uh, that Captain Anderson takes, and etc. So those things are limiting and kind of conflicting with the openness and endless possibilities we have with Mass Effect as a game, and that's where fan work enters in this mist. And important to look at user-generated content as also part of this transmedia universe. So the ideas of canon, of fanon, of head canons, and transmedia dissonance, they show this complexity of the media production landscape, the difference between different media, differences of narrative, different affordances, and etc. And those things complicate our understanding of these objects. Particularly because that was a topic of my interest, diversity and identity politics are presented and discussed very differently by each kind of transmedia product in this universe. The books have actually a good number, or like some queer characters in the books that don't really appear much in the main series, but also fall tropes to killing the gays and all that. I know they appear and then they die. Um, so there's this kind of problems, but you see a bit more of diversity outside the game setting as well. But of course, that's taken to a much higher level on the fan work. Um, and Mass Effect remains a relevant case study. I still think that there's several aspects that are underexplored in Mass Effect. So I'm very curious to see what like what Stephanie is talking about the mutant and all that, and then other people here in the chat that seem to be also doing their PhDs, having Mass Effect as case studies, and this approach from archaeology that I've never really thought about, but would still be another big thesis as well. So there's so much interesting research that can still stem from Mass Effect, which I think shows the strength of the franchise, the potential of this franchise. And yeah, let's hope that new games will come. I actually am one of those that actually likes Andromeda a little bit and wanted to see the continuation of that story. And I feel a little bit sad that probably won't see that, but I would love to. I would love to see where those stories would lead. Um, yeah, so thank you. You can contact me in several ways. So I am at Leandro AB Lima in many networks, so Twitter and Instagram. And I have my own website, leandrolimaphd.com, where you can find my publications. But also, well, I should update that because there's one publication that's still not there. But you can find most of my things over there, both Mass Effect related and others as well, because I end up publishing about other games recently, like Yakuza and Nier Automata. But yeah, you can find also some of my Mass Effect publications there.